Yep. Okay, I'm going to admit folks and we'll take a 5-minute break. Trust me that I will insert it at the right time.
Do we have the sound somewhere?
Yeah. I would like to invite everyone who is an attendee to please be sure that you are muted. We will start in just another moment or two. Welcome. This is, while we're letting folks arrive, this is the third of a 3-part series, Countering Christian Nationalism Community Conversation, that is being co-hosted by multiple organizations, and this work is being funded this year by the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. We're just going to give it one more moment before we begin. And Zandra, for the moment, I'm going to make you a host so that you can let folks in. Greetings, everyone. Once again, my name is Lisa Bodwin. I'm the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Council of Churches. Welcome, welcome. This is the third of 3 Countering Christian Nationalism community conversations that the New Hampshire Council of Churches organized and then invited organizational partners to join us. Let's begin by thanking tonight's co-sponsors, Engage New Hampshire, NAACP Manchester, 603 Equality, American Friends Service Committee, Open Democracy, New Hampshire Peace Action, and New Hampshire Outright. It's a gift to gather with you, united by a shared hope for a more just, inclusive, and democratic society. In this spirit, we want to just take a moment to also acknowledge the disturbing neo-Nazi presence that appeared in Concord last August and the horrifying shootings that occurred again only last week. These events remind us of the urgency of committing ourselves to a nonviolent, clear strategy for uniting our communities and securing our democracy. Whether you came tonight rooted in deep faith, wrestling with doubt, carrying spiritual wounds, or holding no particular religious belief at all, know that you are welcome here. We gather in the spirit of sacred curiosity, humility, and a commitment to collective liberation. This is a space for deep listening, for learning, and for courage. May we bring grace to one another and to ourselves. May we be present, not just in body, but in heart and mind. May we practice active listening, especially when we hear challenges or things that ask us to stretch. May we leave tonight not only more informed, but more willing to act. Thank you to tonight's speakers. Your willingness to share your knowledge and vision strengthens us all. Let us move into this time together with open minds, tender hearts, and the fierce commitment to build more loving and just communities across the Granite State. Resistance, everyone, resistance. Tonight's speakers are Holly Testerman, Zandra Rice Hawkins of Engage New Hampshire, Olivia Zink of Open Democracy, Rabbi Donna Kirshbaum, and Pastor Ilgenfritz, a United Church of Christ minister. The rhetoric of Christian nationalism permeates many corners of society. In March, during the first conversation, you heard a description of Christian nationalism's impact on a number of different target groups. In May, the second conversation, 7 different speakers each shared a 3-minute intro on a specific way Christian nationalism impacted their community or a policy sector, and then attendees chose a speaker and joined a breakout room to take a deeper dive with that speaker. Tonight, in the third conversation, we will learn about the 7 Mountain Mandate, then how Christian nationalism is attacking democracy and public education. From those impacts, we are going to pivot into a community tool for dismantling these harmful ideologies. And finally, we will close with an example of a recent courageous conversation that happened in northern New Hampshire. I'm just going to have us jump right in.
What?
Got no water.
We have no water?
I played with
Welcome to Holly Testerman.
I tried to fix something on the electric box and I think I shorted it and knocked it.
Hi there. I'm Holly.
It looks like you're
Holly,
muted.
my apologies. I muted you temporarily as we were fixing the mute, so I think you can unmute now.
Oh, hi.
There you go. Thank you.
Hi. I'm Holly. Hold on a minute. Is it while I figure out my screen share? And then I will be right with you. Okay. So we should be screen shared now. Yeah, so I'm here to just kind of give you guys an overview about what the 7 Mountains Mandate is. It's definitely something, so just background on me. I grew up in a conservative Christian community in New Hampshire. My particular community, I'd never heard the 7 Mountain Mandate like specifically named before, but when I looked into what it was, I was kind of noticing the through lines just for like experiences in different faith communities that I've been in. It's definitely a pretty sneaky one. So yeah, hold on. There we go. So the 7 Mountains Mandate, which I've just abbreviated as 7MM. So it's like a dominionist conservative theology within evangelical Christianity. It's especially common in charismatic Christian groups, but it's becoming increasingly common in other Protestant groups as well. It teaches that there are 7 areas or mountains of society that you can see here that people who believe this should seek to dominate. 7MM teaches that believers must actively engage in spiritual warfare through prayer and prophecy and establish complete control over these different spheres to create like a monolithic white nationalist Christian culture. So as you can see here, those different spheres of society that they've divided it into are business and finances, government, family, religion, media and communication, education, and arts and entertainment. So, as you can imagine, a belief system like this is something that is very vulnerable to being co-opted by people who want power. So here are a list of some political leaders who have just like expressed like a belief in the 7 Mountains Mandate. This picture that you see here, the 7 Mountains Mandate was integral to the 2024 re-election of Donald Trump. In this picture, in the red jacket, you can see Paula White Cain, Donald Trump's spiritual advisor. with other faith leaders praying over Trump just a week before the 2024 election. At this particular event that is pictured, faith leaders claimed to have knocked on over 8 million doors to campaign for President Trump. They called for the separation of church and state, which if you think about wanting to like reclaim like society and culture for like a monolithic culture, like of course you want separation, or like you want to end the separation of church and state. They also called Trump like a warrior of wisdom and a fighter for freedom, some of that spiritual warfare language, but like personified on like, or like projected onto like a human. One faith leader spoke of quote, the enemy trying to kill children in the classroom, end quote. This faith leader was not referring to school shootings or to gun control. Instead, he was referring to, quote, the ideologies and social constructs that are out of alignment with the will of God, which is a little scary. So that last quote from that rally is worth paying attention to, because scapegoating is how political leaders co-opt spiritual beliefs for political gain. So if they can convince like Christians that are trending more conservative that they should exert like dominion over all of culture, they can then scapegoat people or communities that aren't matching up with that like white nationalist Christian vibe as enemies in spiritual warfare. So when these leaders have then convinced American or like conservative Christians that trans people, immigrants, public school staff, or Palestinians are the problem, they then start to build political support for removing those people or communities from society. And that's what's been reflected in, honestly, a lot of the bills that we're seeing getting passed in this state this year. The ones that come to mind for me are a lot of the parental rights bills in our schools, the bills banning gender affirming care for trans minors. All of this support for that starts with scapegoating a group of people as the problem in society. And this belief system is kind of like an avenue for that, if that makes sense. So I think it's really important to be able to spot the Seven Mountains Mandate or like related belief systems when we see it in our communities, because I think the thing to remember here is that this isn't like an organized denomination. There's no like central website. There's no like central admin. It's just something that some people believe. And with the levels of Christian nationalism that we are currently seeing in our society, not everyone who has beliefs that align with the Seven Mountains Mandate may know them by that name. Like in the process of creating this presentation, I talked to my sister who's a progressive Christian, and she and I both realized that we had encountered features of the Seven Mountains Mandate movement, both in the church we were raised in, which is evangelical free, as well as at the Christian colleges we attended, which were both like Reformed, Calvinist. Neither of those spaces were remotely like close to charismaticism otherwise. Just like the similarities that we were seeing were more like an intense thought that like Christians are being persecuted by insert scapegoated community here, and also like the heavy scapegoating, and just like that fear that comes with truly believing that your way of life is under attack. And so because this ideology is likely not going to be explicitly named as Seven Mountains, when you encounter it in the wild, here are some features that you can look out for. So a belief that Christian control or influence should be exerted over society. So for example, I also talked to my brother, who's a more conservative Christian, in the process of creating this presentation. And I kind of asked him if he had seen some of these characteristics at his college campus ministry that he's involved in. And he was like, well, you know, like they're not telling us to take up arms or anything, but like I do think that like, you know, like the church should control society. And I was like, oh, okay. So yeah, a belief that Christians should control our influence should be exerted over society. A belief that white American Christians experience persecution for their faith. Again, I think that a lot of this is motivated, or like the reason people have reasons that they believe the things they do. I think being afraid that your way of life will disappear, your way of life is under attack, is something that would really motivate you to seek more control over society. And then also obviously scapegoating people or communities as common enemies in the context of spiritual warfare. Yeah. So I wanted to leave plenty of room for this part of the presentation, just because I know the events of last week were a lot, just so much violence, and you know, none of it is okay. But so Charlie Kirk was affiliated with the Seven Mountains movement. We have a quote from him from February 2020, where he said, finally, we have a president who understands the importance of the seven mounds of cultural influence. And as I'm sure we all know, Charlie Kirk was someone who dedicated his career and ultimately his life to, you know, going and like pushing ideology that really scapegoated a lot of communities, you know, and really positioned a lot of vulnerable people, people of color, immigrants, trans community, queer community, disabled community, as the problem with society. And that's just, if we can like for a minute put ourselves in the shoes of someone who followed Charlie Kirk, who was inspired by Charlie Kirk, who like believed in some sense like what Charlie Kirk was telling them. If we understand Charlie Kirk to be someone who was interested in exerting Christian control and influence over all of society via literal spiritual warfare and scapegoating of vulnerable communities, what would it mean to his followers who believe all of what I just said to see him publicly assassinated? It would be confirmation of the fact that this is a war, we're being persecuted, and our way of life is under attack. It's going to confirm all of the fear that you're feeling, and it's going to make you way more afraid because it's actual literal danger, like, you know, it's gun violence. And so because of that, I think many people in this room, because this is an event that is, you know, like many people in this room are religious. And although I don't think anyone here would be someone who would espouse like white nationalist beliefs, I think with just the pervasiveness, it is just very likely that you might meet someone or come across someone who maybe shares some beliefs with you, but maybe also believes in some Seven Mountains mandate stuff. And who maybe some of you know people who are, you know, maybe also religious in a different way than you, and who really like have supported Charlie Kirk, or have been experiencing a lot of fear because of the events of last week. And so because of that, so my day job is I'm a mental health therapist, and I wanted to have you guys come away with maybe some tools for how to like just feeling like equipped for conversations with people who may be experiencing a lot of fear. So we're flipping into mental health mode, and I'm gonna nerd at you. So this is something that I that probably all of my clients have seen. So like this is just kind of a model of like how trauma works in your brain. So there's a difference between felt safety and actual safety. You can be literally safe, like have a roof over your head, have food and water, have friends, but it's still possible to be traumatized if we do not feel and perceive that we are safe. That's a different thing. So this is a hand model of the brain. So what I want everyone to do, if they have a hand free, is I want you to like hold your hand up, palm forward, put your thumb over your palm, and then close your fingers over your thumb. So you're making a
This may
fist with your
interest you.
thumb inside of your fingers.
This may interest you.
No, I'm in the middle of something.
Okay, well, she's a mental health
So-
counselor, but
And I can send this resource in the chat later. I actually had it downloaded and I was planning to send it in the chat
Talking
because there's a
about
lot of words
trauma.
on here. So anyways,
those
you
are
have
the
your
Charlie
fist,
Kirk people.
your little,
Please go on mute.
Hand model of the brain.
Yeah.
Do you know how
so
that
you have
works?
your little
Have you
hand
heard that
model of the
before?
brain. Yeah, so in this model, so your palm is like your brainstem. Your thumb is your limbic system, which is the part of your brain that's like responsible for processing stress. And then your fingers are the cortex of your brain, which is the part of your brain that does like logical thought, like math problems, communication, all of that stuff. When your system is under stress, the limbic system will push the cortex away. Not like literally, but this is just the model, right? And actually, energy will stop going to the cortex, to the part of your brain responsible for logical thought, because more energy needs to go to the brainstem and to the limbic system, which is the part of your brain that's responsible for survival. What this means is that when people are in a stress response, or when people are in a state of fear or in a survival response, they are actually just not capable of thinking logically. And so I think it can be really, maybe some of us have experienced this week where someone, you know, has said something really insensitive or really out of pocket, you know, maybe online or something, and maybe you've tried to like debate them in the comments or have a reasoned conversation with them, and you're like, why are they not reasonable? It's because they're afraid and their brain is in survival mode. So when we've flipped our lid, which is, you know, like just a visual, you know, for what you can call it, we're not thinking logically. So like the first response that needs to happen is we need to feel safe again. So if you have someone in your life who's really afraid
Honey, eat your dinner.
because of what happened
Eat your
with
dinner.
Charlie Kirk, or someone who's really worried, probably like the first thing that might be helpful with for them is just anything that helps regulate their nervous system. So make sure they have food, make sure they have water, you know, go outside, get some fresh air, like they're really just like the most basic stuff their body can need, because before they're at the point where they are able to reason again, where that cortex is giving that limbic system a nice hug and making it feel safe, like their body needs to feel safe first. And they need to be regulated. So if you can be a trustworthy person for them to talk to, and prioritize helping them safely process what's been going on, that's really helpful. I think it's important to remember that if any belief system that teaches you that you are truly in physical danger, that you are truly involved in warfare, is going to be traumatizing to your body. And so getting people regulated and helping them feel safe is really the first line of defense that we can do. And honestly, will probably mitigate like further harm that they might like that they might have the potential to go and do to other people, if we can get them feeling nice and safe. Like I know that like, and I don't mean for this to like overshadow any of the harm that like marginalized and vulnerable communities have experienced because of the Seven Mountains Mandate, because of white nationalism. But I think that the events of this week and the way that people have been responding online is a fantastic example, unfortunately, of the way that Christian nationalism and white nationalism harm everyone, including white Christians and white nationalists themselves. So yeah, I appreciate you guys being, you know, first responders for your community in that way. I know that sometimes it doesn't feel like the biggest, flashiest thing that you can do, but people with regulated nervous systems make good decisions and take care of other people better. So I just wanted to give everyone that resource, and I'll also have it downloaded to send to people in the chat afterwards. So yeah, and this is just other stuff to think about for like how to support people. You might see out in the wild, you know, saying things like we need to exert dominion or control over society, and thinking about like, you know, they're afraid, they're worried about something. What is the core need that they're trying to fulfill, right? Do they need to feel safe? Do they need to express the way they feel? Do they need to find a community that reflects their values? These are all good needs for people to have. They're all things that make sense. They're all things that we just need. But when we don't feel safe, when we're not at a point where we can be using our cortex and our reasonable thinking mind, we might find some ways to fulfill those needs that hurt ourselves or that hurt other people. So, you know, the other thing that you can be thinking about is trying to figure out what is that actual human need that these people have and help them fulfill it. You know, rather than reacting out of fear. Like if they need community, be community for them. If they need a place to like express how they feel, you can be a safe person to have that conversation with. If they literally just need to feel safe and they need food in their belly and water and going outside, it's honestly pretty amazing how much like just those simple basic things will really help people feel supported mental health wise. So I know that was kind of like a segue from the informational presentation and the Seven Mountains stuff, but just based on the events of the last week, I felt that was really important to share, just in case some of you might have the opportunity to be those first responders for your community. So that's all I have, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Holly. That was incredibly informative. I wonder, will we be able to send these, a PDF of your slides out to folks in a follow-up?
Yeah, I can
Great.
absolutely do that as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And next up, we have Olivia Zink, Executive Director of Open Democracy. Olivia, will you please let me know if you are going to be screen sharing and if I need to give you permission? Thank you, Olivia, for joining us.
I am screen sharing. Are you able to see my
Yes.
slides? I'm gonna just try to make it full screen if it works.
Yep.
Okay. So welcome everyone. My name is Olivia Zink, Executive Director for Open Democracy. We are a nonpartisan 501c3. We work on structural democracy issues here in New Hampshire. We were founded by Granny D, who walked across the country for campaign finance. And so we also work on campaign finance as fair maps, and voting is how we work to protect our democracy. Today's presentation is a little bit different than what I normally deliver. So please bear with me as I sort of feel the feelings on this presentation. Christian nationalism and the threat to our democracy. We are in a fight of lightness and darkness, a fight of power and principle. The increasing power of the hard right American Christians that are mostly white and have been radicalized for 50 years. Today, they're immersed in a crisis, a moral panic, that are casting aside core values of democracy. And I think it's important for us to understand that they're using minority rule to marginalize opponents and to oppose their values on our broader society. The harm that Christian nationalism is causing. Christian nationalism is one of the most dangerous forces that are facing our politics, our law, and our culture. And it's not just rhetoric. There are real consequences that are shaping our laws and culture. The threats to democracy, including voter suppression and election denialism, Christian nationalism was part, or there was some Christian nationalism as part of the attack of January 6th on the Capitol. We're also seeing attacks to marginalized community. We're also seeing the book bans and censorships. Democracy and education are so critical, and also disinformation campaigns to manipulate voters and spread fear. And this is just my own personal thoughts about this, is that faith should be about love, justice, and inclusion, not about fear, control, and exclusion. So who's behind Christian nationalists? I can't do this without talking about who's paying for this movement. This is a well-organized, well-funded movement, and it's not just coming from churches. There are billionaire funders and corporate interests that are funding Christian nationalism. This is not an inclusionary list. This is just some of the bad actors. Heritage Foundation, the Koch brothers, the Mercier family, Sheldon Adelson, Amazon, CVS, Charles Schwab, AT&T, Family Policy Alliance, Tim Dunn, the Martin family, the Council for National Policy. There are many funders in this movement. That is just a few names, just a few. There are also right-wing media outlets, and many of these have been well established for 50 years. And there are paid disinformation networks, what I call kind of those that are trying to create fear in our community through disinformation. Politicians are using faith as a tool for control, and extremist groups are pushing anti-democratic policies within the sort of networks. Someone calls that, they've put the funders, the donors and the doers together to shape Christian nationalism. And these forces are working to really reshape what we normally see in politics, what we see in cultural landscape, and they're gaining some serious ground in our communities, in our state, and in our country. I just want to talk a little bit about how Christian nationalism are targeting women's rights to votes. And the church members and Christian nationalism are discussing, do they believe that we should allow women to vote? So these discussions are happening in our communities today in 2025, 100 and something years after women's suffrage and women gained the right to vote. We are seeing public support for Christian nationalism in high-ranking members of the White House cabinets, in policies like the SAVE Act, but also here in New Hampshire last year in the passage of House Bill 1569. And now women, when they try to register to vote, if their birth certificate doesn't match their married name, they now have to bring a marriage certificate in order to register to vote. And we have seen hundreds of voters being turned away at the polls on election day. And as I was doing a little bit of research for today's presentation, this article that I've linked in this slide, but also this quote, "A true Christian family is where the husband is the head of the household and the wife submits to his leadership." So these belief systems are strong, but doesn't mean that the husband is entitled to 2 votes. We have some major threats to the health of our democracy. Many of what Christian nationalism or bad actors are saying is that there's a storm coming to sweep away the elites. And I do think that this term elite is an interesting term, because many of those who believe this are not sort of those major donors and funders. This movement has a dangerous assertion and is very undemocratic and destructive. Christian nationalism is a political movement. Their ultimate power is power. Their ultimate goal is power. Sorry, their ultimate goal is power. And I think they're and control over people, which is opposite to what the gospel teaches us. And so Christian nationalism movement is really based on political anxiety and fear brought over our economy. So I think it's important for us to recognize some of those factors as we're doing our work to build a healthy democracy and to counter many of these narratives in our community. Some other concerns is really how white Christian nationalism relates to other ideology, both in the United States and abroad. It is very well organized, very well organized. There is lingering questions about the role that Christian nationalism will play in the midterm elections. And I do think that we need to sort of pay attention to this in the next 13 months as we move into the next election. And also how much of a threat to our democracy. A Yale professor said this is not a culture war. This is a political war over the future of our democracy. And I linked to her article in these slides too, because I think it's important for us to really understand that these are deep historical fights in this nation. And this just didn't come out of thin air. So we talked a little bit about the restrictive law in New Hampshire, but here are two other pieces of legislation that I think are backed behind some of the pushers of Christian nationalism, but that they're going to require our age-strong citizens in New Hampshire who want to request an absentee ballot or are disabled to either send a photocopy of their driver's license to request an absentee ballot or get the form notarized. So more hoops, more restrictions to voters to cast a ballot. So these laws take effect September 30th, just in a few days. And some of us are here to call nursing homes and help educate other voters. And so we invite you to reach out to your age-strong friends who are casting absentee ballots or have Meals on Wheels deliver their food to educate them on the new law, just so their voice is heard and not restricted as some of these policies are intended to do. There are also upcoming elections. So October 7th, there's a Keene primary, and October 7 municipal elections in Franklin. And in November, there are city elections: Berlin, Claremont, Concord, Dover, Keene, Laconia, Manchester, Nashua, Portsmouth, Rochester, and Somersworth. So our 12 cities in the state. And I just wanted you to do your research upon, we are seeing candidates that believe in these ideology run for school board, run for city council. So do your research in these cities, support candidates, but also what we want people to do is be poll observers and poll workers. We're seeing many of these cities don't have enough staff to run elections on election day. So if you live in one of those cities, especially Manchester Ward 4, 5, 11, or 12, they need poll workers. Rochester Ward 5 needs poll workers. Franklin Ward 1 needs election workers. But also if you don't live in one of those cities and you live in a town, please be a poll observer. This is a fun way that on election day, you can just monitor what's going on. And if you see somebody turned away and not able to vote because their birth certificate doesn't match their driver's license, you can have a conversation, encourage them to go home and get a birth certificate or their passport, or if they have a copy of it on their phone, to turn back around and go back and register to vote. So there are some upcoming training sessions about being poll workers and poll observers. We also have democracy teams at Open Democracy. So we meet twice a week and take 3 actions. So simple actions to protect our democracy. And I wanted to leave people like not feeling down about sort of the threats to our democracy, that there are people collectively taking action to make democracy stronger in the state. The other thing that we're doing at Open Democracy is really trying to build a network of high school students that are registering to vote. So we saw in 2022 that 8.5% or 9% of 18-year-olds were registered to vote in New Hampshire. we were able to get that number up through a series of 41 high school voter registration drives across the state, but we'd love to facilitate more high school voter registration drives. So if you know of young people who want to get involved, we invite you to join our conference in Concord on October 4th. But also please share this information because it's important for us to prepare the next generation of leaders to be voters as well. And then I also wanted to share with you our next book club. Shadow Network author Ann Nelson will be with us. And October 14th at 7 p.m. This book is full of information about who's funding, especially Christian nationalism. There is a lot of good information in the book. And even if you don't have time to read the full book in a month, you can still join us and hear what the author has to say. And I'll turn it back to Lisa.
Wow, Olivia, that was incredible to have tools for dismantling right in your own neighborhood and ways to take action. I wonder, Olivia, if you might speak a little bit about, if you can, helping people who live in nursing homes to confirm their right to vote via absentee ballot. Is that another mechanism by which folks can have a short-term volunteer opportunity?
Yeah, we have a list right now of all the nursing homes in those cities that we're calling through. We have a sample script. So if people want to take 1 or 2 phone calls or live in one of those communities, we're really trying to educate them. I had a conversation with an activities director at a nursing facility and that they don't have a notary at, and many of their residents don't have current or even expired photo IDs, or birth certificates. So making sure that a notary of republic is able to go to that facility and help those residents cast their ballots. So there is a lot of short-term work to be done for the municipal primary, but then as soon as the municipal primary ends in November, we'll be targeting all of the nursing homes ahead of town meeting. So every local town that has a town meeting in March will want to make sure we're having conversations with those residents as well.
Fantastic. What rich information, granular in how it is that our democracy functions on the ground in neighborhoods across the state. It truly takes an enormous team to make that happen. So thanks for lifting up all of those opportunities. I wondered too, Olivia, if you might also give a shout out to Kaylee from your staff who's been putting in all these wonderful links to resources.
Yes, thank you, Kaylee. And Ursula is one of our team members that's been calling Meals on Wheels programs in nursing homes. So you know, we can't fight back or combat our threats to democracy without everybody taking action to educate people to counter the disinformation that's out there around how to cast a ballot in New Hampshire. But also we need to work hard just, you know, to educate people that these policies were not just thought of by New Hampshire legislators and dropped in our laps. These are concerted efforts across the country that's part of a Project 2025 narrative, and that we might see other states implementing some of these other policies that make it harder to vote. And this is part of a deliberate strategy for power for those people who want to keep the power themselves.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up, we have Zandra Rice Hawkins from Engage New Hampshire. Zandra is going to be sharing information about how Christian nationalist ideology and associated white supremacist ideologies are harming public education right here in New Hampshire. Thank you and welcome, Zandra.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Give me one moment. Okay. I'm going to talk about the impact of Christian nationalism on education through the lens of the Project 2025 proposal, which is far-ranging and covers a lot of different issue areas, but is named as the policy agenda for Christian nationalism. And its goal is really to have a government with quote-unquote biblical principles, Christian nationalist principles. This is a pretty serious situation. A lot of the things I'm about to cover that are in Project 2025 related to public education and the students who attend it have been implemented or in the process of being implemented right now under the Trump administration. So some of this is on the game plan still, but some of it is actively moving, and I think you will be familiar with some pieces of it as we go. The other thing to know is that the Heritage Foundation president said of Project 2025 that we are in the middle of a second American Revolution, and it will remain bloodless if it is allowed to be so. So going back to what Holly was talking about how people are being taught to live, promote, and actually go to war for these values, we definitely see that playing out here. So Project 2025 proposal for American education is one of the most extreme plans we've seen. It calls for eliminating the Department of Education, getting rid of all teachers' unions, and tearing down guardrails around education spending. Some of the groups that we've heard of in the news, groups like Moms for Liberty, or maybe perhaps lesser known, the Institute for Education Reform, partnered with Project 2025 to create the proposals around public education pieces. The first sentence of the chapter says that federal education policy should be limited, and ultimately the federal Department of Education should be eliminated. We saw in the conversations in DC very early on in January and February how that conversation was already starting. The new federal education commissioner also agreeing with that proposal and slashing staff upon coming in. And the plan follows an outline by Milton Friedman from 1955 that American education would no longer be a public education system, but done through school vouchers. So these are dollars that would go to families to be used at private or religious institutions, at home schools. In some cases, as we're seeing how school vouchers is playing out across the country for classes here and there, but maybe not a comprehensive academic program. And so we have a lot of concerns, not just about the dismantling of public education and what that means for the future, but also students right now who may not be getting the education that they deserve and what that might mean for them going forward. It also seeks to eliminate the National Education Association's congressional charter. It's a funny little piece that the NEA was actually began as part of a congressional charter. They want to eliminate any of the advocates or supporters of continuing a fully funded, honest, and inclusive public education. So going after educators who are organized together to do the best interest for their students is one way they can do that. It also talks about plans to remove federal oversight for funds under Title I, instead handing over no strings attached state grants, really lowering regulation and oversight. And then with the proposal of federal education funding for students with special needs would also be converted to unregulated block grants. This piece in particular, we're starting to see a lot more at the state and federal level, just the complete eradication of any kind of supports, oversight, laws that require that our education system ensures that every child is met where they're at and gets the services they need to fully become an educated member of society. The proposal also aims at eliminating any policies implemented under the Obama administration that support diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, including so-called critical race theory. And we are seeing that as well at the state level. So we had the banned concepts or divisive concepts law that we saw enacted by, I would say, adherents of Christian nationalism over the last couple of years. This year, at the New Hampshire level, we had a DEI ban very similar to this. It actually just had a court case in August. There was a temporary delay in September. Just this week, there was the temporary restraining order for that to go into full force for public schools has been booted out until October 2nd. So the litigation's ongoing, and the state is trying to force this policy forward. And it would basically take away any kind of programs that are geared at diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, the thing is, some of the folks who were trying to pass these, they have in their mind what that would mean, right? But we have a whole bunch of examples of things they haven't even thought about. So, making sure that we have sports teams for all genders, making sure that if you have a municipal tax property exemption for seniors, that is one way that diversity, equity, inclusion plays out in our communities. This particular state bill is geared at any public entity in the state. So while we are focusing mostly on the schools, it does apply to state agencies and municipalities as well. At the federal level, we've started to see how they're putting those forward too. A lot of talk about the same pieces. In the Heritage Foundation, when the Project 2025 proposal first came out, said the next conservative president must make the institutions of American civil society, quote, hard targets for woke culture warriors. And this is one of the ways that they hope to do that. More telling, they, in this policy book, and as we're seeing play out at the state and federal level, is using the Department of Justice to go after any state or local governments, institutions of higher education, corporations, and in some cases, private employers who are engaged in DEI activities. Project 2025 also takes a really extreme position on LGBTQ rights. This ties in very closely to making sure that students in our schools not only have welcoming places of learning where they feel like they belong, but also that they can learn about history and that they can see a thriving future for themselves. And Project 2025 and the Christian nationalism movement would seek to eliminate federal protections for queer people and students, start to interfere with healthcare needs, criminalize being transgender, and prohibit federal programs from supporting them. And some of the Christian nationalist groups that partnered to write these policies are groups like the Family Policy Alliance, the Center for Family and Human Rights, and the Family Research Council, which have long advocated for positions like this in pursuit of the vision that they have for our country. It also called for the next Secretary of Health and Human Services to, quote, immediately put an end to the department's foray into woke transgender activism, including removing terms related to gender and sexual identity from federal rules, agency regulations, contracts, legislation. And we are starting to see at the federal level the scrubbing of pages for resources for the LGBTQ community, and basically trying to write out of history and existence a portion of our community. The forward of the book, also by the Heritage Present Foundation, said that the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and sexualization of children, as they call it, should be pornography and outlawed. This whole section is really dedicated around going after educators and public librarians who acknowledge LGBTQ existence. And we saw laws like those passed in Florida that were trying to test the waters on what you could do around criminalization. There's a new law in Texas that does something similar. And there's been a lot of concern for some of these frontline educators and librarians who've suddenly been thrust into this really high profile, tense political position when what they're trying to do is make sure to educate kids in our community and ensure the freedom to read. School privatization is another big piece of the Christian nationalist agenda. So in talking about, dismantling of public schools, the alternative, or some would say even the halfway step, because there is some debate about whether or not, ultimately the goal is to divert taxpayer dollars to private and religious schools, or to basically at one point just leave it for families to do on their own. And we've seen here in New Hampshire school vouchers that were just expanded this past year. So regardless of income, wealthy families can apply for them now to use them. There's no accountability or oversight. There's been no audit of the program. In fact, the former New Hampshire Education Commissioner helped block an audit. We'll get to him in a second. There's other programs like Learn Everywhere or micro schools that allow for-profit corporations to provide those, but again, without academic standards or oversight. And part of dismantling this and taking away the money from the public schools is about undermining the public education, about eroding a shared public education system. And it's also a place where they're having an opportunity to push some more their indoctrination. So this last article here from Rolling Stone talks about PragerU. PragerU is like a very conservative program that portrays itself as an educational program, but it's from a far right radio host, media entity. It mistells the history of our country and around the world. And it unfortunately was accepted as a program that could be used for students in New Hampshire. And so you can go and take a look at some of the videos they have on YouTube or other programs. And, as folks here, I would assume, highly educated, pay attention to the world around them, you'll be able to tell very quickly some of the misinformation that's being fed to students, but that feeds into the goal of what these kids may ultimately end up thinking in the future, rather than having a well-rounded, fact-based education to be really moved into this one vision and understanding of the world around them. Here in New Hampshire, just for landscape, so we have major gaps in public school funding across the state because of our high reliance on property taxes. We have one of the most expansive school voucher programs in the country. We had the statewide ban on an honest education, but thankfully a court struck it down. We had the transgender sports ban, and that's been in litigation. And we've had continued attempts to just lower the quality of public education in our state. One of the other pillars that was mentioned that is a mix of the government and the education piece is the political appointees or the control of government. And in the education lane in our state, we've seen that play out. The immediate past Education Commissioner, Frank Edelblut, who is, I would say, an adherent to Christian nationalist ideas, was put in a position of power despite not having any background with public schools, does not support public education, fed into culture wars, actually voted as a state rep against services for students with disabilities. And so, not somebody who's really what you would hope for in an education commissioner. The State Board of Education chair is Drew Klein. He's the president of the Josiah Bartlett Center, which has aligned, and it's the network it is affiliated with has aligned with the agenda out of Project 2025. Our New Hampshire Supreme Court Chief Justice, Gordon MacDonald, former board member for Josiah Bartlett Center, another Supreme Court Justice, Anna Barbara Hance-Marconi, former board vice chair of the Josiah Bartlett Center. And then that brings us to Brian Gould, who was just confirmed this week as a New Hampshire Supreme Court Justice. He's been a frequent lawyer for the New Hampshire GOP and for issues around elections and democracy that run counter to what we would see for a thriving multiracial democracy. And one of the reasons that he was selected, according to reports, a couple of reasons. One was there was a political hope that he would overturn the landmark Claremont education funding decision and other decisions that say that our schools or that our state should put more money towards funding our public schools and that we're underfunded right now. And then I thought this quote was really telling from some of the NHPR's coverage, just in other lawyers talking about how his confirmation would shift the court's orientation going forward because of who he'd be replacing and because of the affiliations and viewpoints of the existing justices. And former House Speaker Bill O'Brien said that Gould would bring what he called an, quote, originalist view of the Constitution to the state's highest court. For those who are familiar with originalism when it comes to our U.S. Constitution, you can be an originalist without necessarily being a Christian nationalist, but a lot of Christian nationalists use that concept of how we should interpret founding documents as, set in that time, no changes, no updates, no taking in new information, and that should be how things are interpreted now when things reach the Supreme Court level. So that draws a lot of concerns for us. And Gould is known as a very, very, very conservative member, political entity in the state. And so what that might mean for the future of the court system in New Hampshire is concerning. That was kind of a lot heavy. So I do just want to say, contrary to like all of those pieces that we see coming down from that Christian nationalist agenda at the federal level, the ways that we're seeing it at the state level, we are having a lot of moments of hope here in New Hampshire. We've had community members come out in a variety of ways for lots of different issues that are targets of the Christian nationalist agenda. And time and again, communities have embraced loving their neighbor, working together, supporting one another over this agenda that really has a very narrow and limited perspective of what life should be like. That's in the slides, but I did want to mention one other piece before I turn it back over. So, one of the things about the dismantling of public education, or the controlling of education for our students, our children, our future, is not just about education itself. Olivia talked about some of the corporate sponsors of the Christian nationalist movement. And I think that's really important to note. As you could see for the school privatization pieces, there were a lot of for-profit companies that are benefiting from the privatization of this public good. And it breaks down our ability as citizens, as families, to be able to have shared resources, shared decision-making, and common good, and takes our attention and really makes us all focus on doing everything ourselves. And so I think of myself as, a mother of 2 kids in public school. I'm very active in our school, but I appreciate that I've got educators who are trained. They know about classroom management. They're teaching my kids about things and in ways that would take me a lot of time to do. And there are some families that they decide to dedicate that time to do that. But what they're not able to do are some of the other things. And so when we take away public regulations, when we take away public education, when we all have to figure out for ourselves if the restaurant down the street or the grocery store sells food that's spoiled, or if we have an oversight agency that makes sure when we go that we're not going to be harmed, when we're all focusing all of our time on that, we can't work together or organize for better things in our community. And I think there's a real thread of that in making everybody really have to go back to doing everything for themselves. So I think of it not just as a culture war piece on that, but really about our ability to have the time and the space and the brain power to organize together to continue to reach out and support one another.
Thank you so much, Zandra. We have a lot of meaty and rich information that we've all been listening to for the last hour. And before we move into a brief 10-minute Q&A, before pivoting into tools and an inspirational story of engaging in courageous conversations, we're gonna do 10 minutes of Q&A. And before we start that, I just wanted to issue a clarifying point for folks for whom learning about Christian nationalism is somewhat brand new. If this is somewhat brand new for you, there was this guy, Paul Weyrich, in the late 60s, early 70s, who has this rather authoritarian approach to how he believes that the United States should be organized. And he spent 30 years as a political operative building relationships across the Republican spectrum. And one of the things that he did is he had an unholy marriage with conservative Christians. And so Christian nationalism is really a tool of authoritarian power grabbing in one nodule. And this is an unholy alliance, and it's a distortion of the teachings of Jesus Christ as far as the 7 denominations under the umbrella of the New Hampshire Council of Churches are concerned. And so I want to make sure that folks don't think that a bunch of conservative Christians across the country woke up and decided that this was going to be the foundation of how they were interpreting the Bible on their own. This is really another iteration of white supremacy and political power grabbing and a usurpation of the teachings of Scripture. So just wanted to put that out there. And let us take just a couple of questions and have a little break from presentations so we can process some of the information we've heard. And if you would like to raise your hand, please do so. We'll take a question. I think we're all just processing, huh? Lot of deep information. I see a lot of nods out there. If you have trouble pressing the raise hand function, you are welcome to unmute.
There is a question in the chat, Lisa.
Oh, great. I'm getting there. Is there a link between Christian nationalism and Christian Zionism? Well, we knew that question would come up. Rabbi Donna, Rabbi Kirshbaum, would you like to address that?
Yes, I can do it very briefly. There sure is. There sure is. What we in the Jewish community are finding, can you hear me all right? Okay. Is that on the whole, Christian nationalists love Israel, don't particularly love Jews. They love Israel as the site of our global repatriation. And once we're all there in this fantasy, then that paves the way for the rapture to begin. It's a powerful story. And you'll find that a lot of settlement activity, if you boil all the fat out of it, can be traced to support from various Christian nationalist groups, financial support, and moral support, and showing up to work the land. It's a strange, for us, a very strange love of Zion, of Zion. And it's a reality, and it's a growing reality. And I think maybe what Peter and I are going to do can flesh that out a bit more.
Thank you for a sneak peek. Fazil, you are welcome to ask your question.
Thank you very much. First of all, also thank you for everybody participating in a great lecture for people that have been on the call. I've been involved in this for some time, living in the South and confronting with or having dialogue with the white supremacist groups, Klan, and also Confederacy. The question I have is that we have over 400,000 churches, pulpits on Sundays. Is there anything in line or in the pipeline that people are reaching out to the churches, to the pastors, to the ministers, and engaging in a dialogue, in a conversation, something to provoke. I have, of course, I'm not a Christian, I'm a Muslim American, but of course, I'm very inclusive about all faiths. I'm concerned about obviously all communities that are at target. I've been to a couple of churches in New Hampshire where, just a short story, really quick. I'm going to finish it. Where I went to somewhere in, I believe in Dover, a beautiful church. They had a musical, a good sermon, and I went to the pastor and I said, you mentioned everything, and you're celebrating a guy who was himself an orphan, a refugee, and you didn't say anything about immigrants and refugees and what's going on in Gaza and all those issues. So he kind of nodded and agreed. He said, why don't you send me an email? Let's talk about this. So I just wanted to kind of bring it the same thing about white nationalism and white supremacy. I'd love to participate in that, but also kind of want to know, is there any efforts in the state of New Hampshire where we're reaching out to churches and at least having some constructive dialogue and conversation? Thank you very much again.
Thank you. That's a totally relevant question. And the Council of Churches has this Countering Christian Nationalism project precisely to engage clergy to be able to have the tools that they need in order to take this back to their congregations as a way for folks to engage in witness based on their faith values. And it's a delicate process because the 7 mainline denominations under the umbrella of the Council of Churches have largely stopped evangelizing, right? And they have strongly recognized separation of church and state. And so some of these kinds of conversations are an uncomfortable landscape for a clergy that has not been big E nor small e evangelizing for decades, if not, for decades, and for whom, they lived in alignment with the Johnson Amendment. So we are doing everything that we can as a small nonprofit, the Council of Churches, and we are providing those tools, especially to the clergy for whom their public witness is an integral part of their faith and of their ministry. So this is happening, and it's not happening enough.
Thank you.
This project is one step into directly addressing and providing spaces and locations, resources and tools for people of faith to more proactively utilize their faith to witness to this unholy alliance that's happened. You're welcome. Do we have another question in the chat? Let's take a peek. Yes. I think that we can now move on to James McKim, who is the recent past president of the Manchester chapter of the NAACP. He has a number of other hats that he wears, and it is my honor to introduce James McKim. Thank you. James, welcome. James, we can't see you. We can't hear you.
To follow up on the Verizon commercial, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. And let's see. I want this. And let me see. Can I share my screen? And it looks like. All right. Can you all see my screen? Excellent. So I am so glad to be able to share with you an example of work that has been done here in Goffstown around conversations. And this actually happened, oh my goodness, 4 years ago now, where we had a series that we called Courageous Community Conversations, Can We Talk About Race? And this was a cooperative effort that I led along with the Goffstown Public Library, St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, of which I am a member, St. Anselm College, Crispin's House, which is a nonprofit organization that works with youth in our town, particularly with youth at our high school level, and the Granite State Organizing Project. So we all came together to put on this series, and it was really based on what many experts have said over time about racism. And so you can see in this photo, we actually based a series of conversations on books, starting with Waking Up White by Debbie Irving, and then conversations with Joseph Barnes, Understanding and Dismantling Racism, then My Grandmother's Hands by Rose Menachem, then The Color of Law. And then we also incorporated a report from the governor's Diversity Advisory Council as part of a conversation. So, this was a result of some personal frustration and stress and community requests. And about just before the series, we were experiencing hate letters being strewn on the lawns of various people in our town. In Goffstown, there were events happening in Portsmouth as well, writings on a bridge. And so we said, what can we do about this? What can we do to help engender conversations about all this and help people to understand how to process this and deal with it? So we set off on a series of events over 13 weeks. And you can see the events here, which were based on the books that I just mentioned. So we actually had Debbie Irving come to speak to us as a kickoff at St. Anselm College. We had 300 people, over 300 people in the Dana Center to hear her speak and to have a conversation with her about her book and hear how she came to write the book and what she's doing. And she's now going across the country talking about her book. We also had the day after she spoke, an opportunity for leaders in our community to be in conversation facilitated by her. Because one of the things that I realized, and many of you know, I do work in the space around helping to facilitate these conversations. One of the things that I've learned is that leaders of communities are afraid to have these conversations with the public because they feel they need to have all the answers in the eyes of the public. And they, of course, don't have the answers. They need a space to have a conversation themselves. So we created a space that next day where just the leaders of our community, our superintendent, our fire chief, our police chief, our town administrator, principals of schools, where those leaders could come together and have conversations and learn and discuss these issues about our community. We brought art into the subject and into the mix, where we had a group called Culturally Curious put on an art show, an art presentation about race in art over time. We had brought in Abby Hutchinson, who does a historic reenactment of interactions around race from back in the late 1700s, 1800s, early 1800s. We held several conversations. We used the high school as the location, the high school media library as those conversations. We had an Ask a Muslim Anything event with Robert Aziz at St. Lawrence Church. So it wasn't just St. Matthew's, it was several of the churches who were involved. So just a series of events where lots of conversations could happen around different topics, different facets of racism. We even had the library, and some of your libraries may have done a human library where people are the books that you check out to have a conversation for 15 or 20 minutes. So we had all these events that we had scheduled and held them through the 13 weeks that engendered a lot of conversations. Here's some photos from the events. One you can see on the top right-hand corner here is Debbie Irving with a couple of the St. Anselm students. We had the Dana Center packed with people, lots of conversations there. This is Robert Aziz at St. Lawrence in the basement doing his Ask a Muslim Anything conversation. This picture on the right is one of the human library conversations that took place between two people. Just to give you a sample of some of the questions that we had for the discussions, were things like, and I should say this is based on, the Episcopal Church has a model for dealing with racial reconciliation called Becoming Beloved Community. And the model is based on a labyrinth that has 4 pillars: telling the truth about where we are, proclaiming the dream of where we want to be, practicing the way of love, and repairing the breach. So for each of those 4 areas, we had conversations that focused on those areas, and we had questions identified that we had people discuss during those conversations. So we tried to provide some guidance for people to actually have these conversations that were facilitated by me. I actually facilitated the conversations. Results, we absolutely increased awareness of what racism is and the fact that it exists here in Goffstown. It exists here in New Hampshire today, even though we're at 2025, or we're 2023, 2022 at that point. Our SAU employees got all 4 of the books that we used during the series and had training on belonging. The high school had an equity committee that developed a belonging plan that incorporated concepts from our series. The high school had a reading list that contained 2 of our books, and we reached approximately 500 people. We had some lessons learned from that we took after that. Noting the partnerships are crucial. Just grateful that there were people who were willing to address the issue. When we started this, we had no idea how many people would show up. We got no complaints, which was amazing to us. No one complained about what we were doing. We were purposefully intergenerational, and we think that was really important. Youth and adults were both interested, and we engaged both youth and adults. Food is always a draw. Whenever you have an event, if you have food, people will come. Also, there's never enough time to complete the conversation. Just as for this event, there will not be enough time to complete the conversation. And we're still hosting events. Our library is still hosting conversations, events that continue this topic. And just finally, the way to approach this is as becoming a more welcoming community, not just fixing a problem, right? And this gets to this notion that Holly talked about, and I think both Olivia and Zandra also talked about, is these white supremacists are operating out of fear. These Christian nationalists are operating out of fear that they are being left out. There's all this talk about anti-racism and racial reconciliation, and they are feeling left out. So our sense is the fix is to create a welcoming community for everybody, which means sometimes you have to go to a little extra length to include the white people so that they don't feel left out. So I'm going to stop there. I think I've used pretty much all my time, but happy to entertain any questions about what we did and the conversations, how they went, how we started them, how we engaged people.
Thank you, James.
And I guess I can also say other libraries across the state have taken this model and have done smaller versions of it.
Fantastic. We will be able to get a PDF of your slide deck.
Yes.
Thank you. And Fazil.
Thank you. Real quick question, James. Thank you so much for the presentation and recommending the books. Just a really quick question in terms of New Hampshire and your community. For the African American community, what is the kind of support in a short term that is needed from your people that are here on the call and across the state? What kind of support we can provide? How can we help to show solidarity, support? Because I know very well the white supremacist elements are quite clearly present, and they're quite vocal. I thought that North was a little better, but compared to North Carolina and Georgia, but apparently we're still living in 1700s. So I just like to know if you can just share some ideas and thoughts how we can provide in the short term, because I think it's really, really important working with a lot of the Black communities and brown communities in the South, that having people from the churches and businesses and even lawmakers, legislators showing up at NAACP events or putting out something in public as an endorsement, I think can be a profound impact, showing that there's a huge community that supports and we're all in this together. Thank you so much again, James.
Sure, Faisal, thank you for your question. So I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina. So I know what's happening down there, and I relate it to here. And so to answer your question, I would say the support that's needed is doing things like frequenting businesses that are owned by African Americans. We have on our Manchester NAACP website a list of businesses that are owned by African Americans. Visit them, shop with them. I'd also say, and this is to Zandra's point, the legislation that is being put forth is what is very discriminatory, and it's setting the tone that that kind of discrimination is the norm. So we need as many people as possible to call your legislator, to go to these protests and speak out, and to say that this is not right. Right? They need to hear it, because if they hear it, and we've gotten proof that when we've had bills where 700 people have signed in and said, no, we are against this bill. And many times, I won't say every time, many times the legislators have perked up and said, okay, this many people are saying no to this bill versus the 4 who said yes. We're going to table this bill. I've seen this also happen at the city level, where at one of the Manchester school board meetings, they were going to vote against creation of programs that would allow for more people to take AP courses, more students to take AP courses, more marginalized people to take AP courses. They were going to vote against it. But we showed up at the school board meeting and spoke in support of it. And we had allies speak in support of the program. The vice chair of the school board said at the end, if you folks were not here to speak for this, we probably would have voted it down. So showing up and speaking out, your presence, your mere presence is effective.
Thank you, Jim. Just to follow up on that, does the NAACP on their website or social media put any call to action so people can actually look at it and share it in social media and in their networks? For example, a legislative call to action, for example.
Yeah, so we actually work very closely with Open Democracy, with Olivia, and AFSC, American Friends Service, who do all the legislative heavy lifting around many issues. And so we work with them on the issues around race. And Zandra didn't say it, but remember she talked about the state lawsuit, the lawsuit against the state for the divisive concepts, the DEI ban. I am actually one of the plaintiffs on that case. So watch out for that kind of thing, and watch out for how your school district, for example, processes that, deals with that. Right? We had the lawsuit. We actually had two school districts: the Oyster River Durham School District and the Grantham School District. They were part of the lawsuit. They stood up. Their school boards approved them standing up for this. So what we need everyone to do is to go to your school board meetings and let your school board know what you want. Give them the permission to actually speak out about this kind of thing, and set regulations in their schools that create the sense for the teachers and the staff that they can and should be teaching this true history, which is not being taught right now, and which is which the laws are trying, the white supremacists and the Christian nationalists are trying to say, don't teach this stuff. We need to strike back and say, yes, please teach this stuff. This stuff must be taught.
Thank you, James. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. We are going to continue to move along, and I appreciate everyone's patience with being bathed in this incredible, these incredible presentations. Next up, we have Rabbi Donna Kirshbaum and Pastor Ilgenfritz, a United Church of Christ minister from the North Country, and they are going to share a story about their work engaging in a community level in a courageous conversation to navigate differences. So welcome to you both.
Thank you. Since, Peter, your questions are shorter than my answers, I wonder if you'd like to speak first and just say the 2 times this summer we've met to talk.
Sure. And I'm Peter Ilgenfritz, and I'm the pastor at First Congregational Church in Littleton, New Hampshire, part of the United Church of Christ. And Donna reached out to me to facilitate a conversation with her after the screening of No Other Land at the Colonial Theater in Bethlehem. And I had a series of questions, and we picked 5 questions just to kind of point to how we underwent a dialogue and a way to come from a place and a movie that could build absolute divisiveness, fear, anxiety, and a story. But as Donna pointed out at the beginning, it was a story, and to build out a fuller story of the complexity of the situation, and to open the audience to some wonderment in the midst. So, Donna, you want me to start in with the questions?
Sure. And if you want to mention that we, in a way, had a follow-up at your church.
We did. And we had a follow-up last month with Donna and Cantor from neighboring town, Amy Mitz, and had a conversation about what we titled a chance to engage about issues and questions about the Middle East. And that again was an opportunity for the sake of learning, deepening relationship, understanding, and leading with curiosity as a ground to learn from. And yeah, anything more, Donna, before I jump in?
Actually, I just want to share the 3 hats I wear and that I bring to this, or 3
Great.
3 yarmulkes that I wear. I am the rabbi of Bethlehem Hebrew Congregation. The pandemic year would have been our 100th year. We had a big celebration planned. And thanks to the pandemic, we're now a year-round congregation, although being 10 miles from Mount Washington, we close the building in the winter. But now thanks to Zoom, I continue throughout the year. So that's one hat I wear. Another is that, so that's for 5 months of the year when we have the building open. At the moment, the other 7 months of the year, I'm in Baltimore, working as a chaplain at Johns Hopkins Hospital, the main campus. But my other hat is that I'm a peace activist, having helped to establish the Israeli movement called Women Wage Peace. And in 2022, when they got NGO status in the PA and the Palestinian Authority, we were more or less officially joined by our Palestinian sister movement, Women of the Sun. Their name comes from a Darwish poem. Nisel Shemps is their name. And though you don't know about us, we're working on that, we have been twice nominated with our Palestinian partners, Women of the Sun, for the Nobel Peace Prize. And we'll hear in a few weeks. Unless we're outdone by you-know-who. I think our chances are better this year. So go ahead.
That's great. So we chose 5 questions that kind of showed the context of our conversations that we've had. What is your biggest hope and fear for this conversation, Donna?
Right. So we thought we just, rather than tell you about it, we would just have, one of these conversations. So my biggest hope is what I always hope for, that we'll leave touched by one another's humanity. But my biggest fear is that you won't be able to hear the current concerns of American Jews, because you'll see in your mind's eye pictures of starving Gazan children when you think of Jews. And even if I insist that there's a through line between starvation in Gaza and the well-documented anti-Semitism of Christian nationalists, my fear is it will be lost on you, since you, as I am, are rightly distracted by man-made starvation. So to me, this through line is the shared story of loss and the militant response to a loss that hasn't been adequately grieved. And here's where I'm putting on my hat as a chaplain. I tend to see a lot refracted through the lens of pastoral work. We're dealing with losses that haven't been adequately grieved. And to me, when grief is repressed, you get grievance, a sense of being wrong or injured that has essentially no way to be healed. Grief can heal. Grievance is another story. And to circle back to CN, Christian nationalism, I mistrust it for many reasons, including its constant need to project blame and shame on others. And this tendency to me is a sign of, again, not adequately grieving a loss.
That's great. Thanks, Donna. One of the things that you often talk about and challenge folks in these conversations is to say, what's at stake for you in this conversation? We all have our opinions about Israel, Palestinians, Gaza, so forth. And what's at stake for you, Donna, in this conversation?
Well, on the simplest level, I'm a dual citizen of the US and Israel, and I love both my countries, which of course doesn't mean I have to love what's happening to them or in them. But I have love for both my countries, and with love comes hope. I want to share something. I want to share 2 brief things. I know we're running out of time. First of all, years ago, I heard Madeleine L'Engle speak. She wrote A Wrinkle in Time and the trilogy, in fact. And she said to us, whoever heard of curling up in bed at night with a good set of facts? It's story and not fact. That's the chief vehicle of truth available to humankind. So that I try to take with me into everything and try to tease out what's at stake for anyone I meet personally when they're willing to talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. With my own congregation, our New Year's is coming up on Monday, and something I'm going to remind them of, I've shared this with them before, is a quote from a beloved Hasidic rabbi. Many decades ago, he said, "If you see precisely what needs to be prepared and, repaired, what needs to be repaired, and precisely how to repair it, then you've found a piece of the world that God has left for you to complete. But if you only see what's wrong and ugly in the world, then it's you yourself who needs repair." And I count myself among those who are exceptionally lucky, because I found a piece of the world to prepare, but I do it along with 49,999 other women, the 50,000 of us, of my sisters in Israel and Palestine, in Women Wage Peace.
Thanks, Donna. I've used that quote. I've preached on that quote. I love that. From Women Wage Peace, I've learned a lot from you in our conversations about the role of women in peacemaking. Could you say a word about that?
Yes, always happy to do that. My explanation for why women are the missing piece in peacemaking and also peace building, it's simple, and it does not rely on gender essentialism, all women are X, or on biological determinism. Instead, in a thickly patriarchal society, those human beings who have grown up identifying as girls or who have been identified as girls are given approximately 10 years between the ages of 4 and 14 to become custodians of our shared human voice, which I would characterize as the voice that can say what it sees and know what it knows. And those are words from my mentor, Carol Gilligan. But also knows how to speak in a code acceptable to the patriarchy. So for instance, when my mentor, Carol Gilligan, was asked by a woman she was interviewing for a big project at Harvard, the woman interrupted Carol, the interviewer, and the interviewee said, "Wait a minute, do you want to know what I think? Or do you want to know what I really think?" So we know about coding, but we also know how to say what we see and know what we know. And to circle back to CN, I see chilling example after chilling example of groupthink, especially about whom to blame and shame, which to me is a sure sign that hatred's found fertile ground in which to grow and spread. That's never good news for the Jews.
In these conversations that we've had, what do you see as the elephant in the room, Donna? What do you see that no one wants to talk about, but that's right there?
Well, I'm going to first answer as a Jewish person, and then as a human being, and as a Jewish leader. I feel like I'm seeing the formerly genteel anti-Semitism coming out of hiding on the right and the left in the form of Israel hatred. Not deep concern about the current government that's been called Israel's most extreme ever, but for an imagined monolithic Israel. A few weeks ago, 1 million Israelis of our population of 10 million, so 1/10 of the whole population, took to the streets, as many of us have been doing since 2020, end of 2022, to protest the invasion of Gaza City, to call for an end to the war, and of course, the return of the hostages. 1 million doesn't make its way into the American press, of course. For me as a human being, the elephant in the room for me is that, at least in my community, it's very hard for me to get a robust conversation going about preparing for a prolonged period of the long dark, as Francis Weller calls it. Not that repairing is irrelevant, but I think we all need to join Team Macy. We all need to join Joanna Macy. She has an approach to what I'm not sure she coined the phrase, but I'm sure many of you know, collapse readiness, which isn't about stockpiling supplies, but about fostering psychological resilience and spiritual resilience.
Mhm.
And she calls this process the work that reconnects. Krista Tippett has a way of saying it too. Much is breaking, but much is being born.
Much is Go ahead.
To circle back to Christian nationalism, I think the arc of the CN story, to me, it involves a very well and shrewdly articulated fantasy of, to use Zuckerberg's phrase, moving fast and breaking things for the sake of returning to a deeply imagined, happier, simpler time. But that to me is another example of unmetabolized grief.
And finally, Donna, what do you want people to know, to go home with, to take from this conversation?
I'm glad you asked me that, because as I said, our new year begins on Monday night, and by our traditional reckoning, it'll be the beginning of the year 5,786. It's a long time. For anything to last. Historically speaking, we're probably about 3,000 years old. But I want people to go home with a sense of the core values of my tradition that have clearly been hijacked. Especially that all human beings are created in God's image, all human beings. That we always have to come down on the side of life, we have to choose life. And that the reason for our longevity goes back to a story that I thought I'd show you rather than just tell you about. So those of us who have a traditional prayer life put on just in the mornings something called tefillin. And I'm not going to put on the arm tefillin. I'm just going to put on the tefillin rosh, which is the head tefillin without my kippah on. So I'm just demonstrating. And it goes here, and there's a beautiful inscription that goes on a piece of parchment inside this box. But in order to fit securely on your head, there's and these straps are important too. There's a knot in the back here, right here. And this midrash, this ancient story, pictures God putting on tefillin every morning too, and praying. And then the story asks and answers its question: what does God have to pray about? Really, what's the content of God's prayers? The answer: every single morning when God wakes up, God prays that God's sense of compassion will prevail over God's sense of justice. Without justice, without death in the world and so without justice, or we would take it to mean judgment, really, not restorative or distributive or retributive justice, but judgment. The world has to have both, but that every single day God touches this knot in the back and prays that God's own compassion will prevail over God's sense of strict judgment. So I hope you'll take home the fact that we place our faith in the notion that God chooses over and over and over and over again compassion over strict judgment. And we have to do the same.
Thank you, Donna. These conversations have been such a gift to me personally, because I have learned so much from our connection, our conversations, our friendship, and to bring others into a place of how can we engage about difficult issues of which we have very strong opinions, but do that with, again, that sense of leaning into curiosity, wonder, learning for the sake of relationship.
Yes, right. That's the key, for the sake of relationship. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa, for.
Well, thank you. Thank you to both of you. Zandra, if you could provide a little context, we might be able to get the answer to the question that you asked.
The real-time chat question.
Yes.
You were quoting a woman who used, and now I gotta find my note for it was around the grieving and loss piece and left to repair. Come back to me. I've got to find my scribbled notes on which piece it was, but there was a phrase you used around resilience that I was trying to catch. And you were quoting Gloria? Does that sound familiar? Oh, you're on mute.
Close to me.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Joanna Macy.
Joanna Macy. Yeah.
Oh, Joanna Macy. Thank you, not Gloria. What was the quote from her?
Well, her sense of the great turning isn't about stockpiling, necessities, stockpiling provisions. It's about building psychological and spiritual resiliency.
Thank you.
Which in a really beautiful way sort of rounds us back to some of what Holly shared with us in the beginning. And your offering, your part of your conversation took some of what Holly was suggesting about the psychological traumas and just took it to a deeper, more spiritual place, a more reflective place. It was incredible. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to provide some information, although it feels a little strange to provide information after that last segment. But I do have to wind us down and bring us to a close. I'm going to put a link in the chat. There is a link in the chat for the evaluation, and it's really important. We're grateful that you came and joined us tonight, but we want these presentations to be the best that they can be. So it would be incredible gift to us if you could, in fact, click on that link for the evaluation and take a couple of minutes when we're done. And I would like to say that we are very grateful for tonight's co-sponsors and to the speakers. I'm just going to name our co-sponsors one more time: Engage New Hampshire, Manchester NAACP, 603 Equality, American Friends Service Committee, Open Democracy, New Hampshire Peace Action, and New Hampshire Outright. I am professionally and personally very grateful for the many, many hands who have made this three-part series possible, and for all of the resources that the collaborating organizations and individuals have brought together. It's been incredible, and the work is not ending. It's just shifting a little. The Council of Churches will be starting a Countering Christian Nationalism work group, and its first monthly meeting will be on September 24th at 7 p.m. You will get that, plus all of the information about the other opportunities to plug in such a way that makes your heart sing. There's plenty of opportunities that have been offered tonight. I will add that the hubs that we are trying to build through this monthly work group meeting are supposed to be place-based hubs that will serve as a first line of connection, information sharing, and coordinated response when extremist activity or rhetoric emerges in a community. So we hope you might consider coming in, joining those meetings. But if you don't join those meetings, Open Democracy, Engage New Hampshire, SECO, New Hampshire Outright, 603 Equality, American Friends Service Committee, Manchester NAACP. There's a cornucopia of choices. So please get yourself plugged in and definitely find a way to give an hour a month or 2 or 3 hours a month if you can, in a concerted, strategic way, because organizations have long-range strategic ideas about how to persistently resist this encroachment of authoritarian rule and white supremacy. So we hope you are feeling inspired, because lots of tools were offered, peppered in throughout the really discouraging information, but we need to have the facts to be able to build resiliency in every corner of New Hampshire. So thank you all so much for your time and your attention. And have I missed anything to any of my co-presenters? Yes, Zandra.
Lisa, we have a comment in the chat that you have to log into Gmail to do the evaluation. So if we can just change the sharing permissions to anybody who has the link, I think that'll resolve that. So for anybody who that catches, we should hopefully have that resolved in just a minute.
Okay, that will take me maybe more than a minute. If Zandra, if you can take over any other additional closing, I will go to that. I can't talk and do that at the same time.
No
Thanks.
Any last thoughts or questions for those in the room, or thoughts about the September 24th meeting that you want to make sure is on the agenda for that?
You asking me that question?
Oh, no, I'm asking the room.
Oh,
No worries. Seeing none, I think what we'll plan then, so Lisa will follow up with an email from the New Hampshire Council of Churches with all of those materials. If friends just want to hang on for 1 minute, we'll make sure that that evaluation form is well done. Those are important for us for feedback for future programming. And I will say also for the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation and other grantors to see the outcomes of these meetings. So would appreciate people taking a moment to fill those out. And I see a question, will we get a copy of this so we can review it? Is that of the presentation of the slideshows, Cheryl, that you're asking for?
For the recording.
Yeah, recording. Yes, yeah, we can make sure that happens as well.
And I am not sure that I can fix this Gmail slip up. I may have to recreate, so I will send the evaluation link in the follow-up email with all of the materials and a link to tonight's recording. Gosh, we are perfectly on time. This has been a wonderful evening. My deepest gratitude for the presenters and all of the other people behind the scenes who gather together all of the research and information so that we can do this work. Thank you, everyone. And we can prevail. We can protect democracy. We can eliminate the distortions of Christianity that are out there. and we can serve love-driven communities. We can co-create and build resilience and love-driven communities. Thank you all for your attention, and good night.
Good night. Thank you.